If you guys are interested in seeing how I got my orchid to get 2 flower spikes after 2 years, stick around. Hey guys, I am back. Wanted to do another video. I wanted to just briefly talk about orchids. When I first got into plants, orchids were those ones that I was initially exposed to because you go to the grocery store and you tend to see orchids right at the entrance around April, May because they're blooming already. And you see them with these big, wide leaves, right? And they have these swooping flower spikes with these gorgeous flowers. Now, I have one OG. She's one of my first plants ever, and I'll show you her now. And for a while I had 6 of them. And this was in the beginning of my plant journey when I first got into plants. Orchids were my first plant because I'm like, I can get an orchid. They're easy to care for, yada, yada, yada. Not knowing the specific manner in which orchids grow in nature. Now, if you don't know about orchids, orchids naturally grow on tree trunks. So they get these thick roots that swoop on around the trunk itself and they latch on. And the leaves kind of grow down this way. And then the flower spikes tend to kind of curl out and over like a hook and then get those blooms. So the reason why orchids do that is they want to avoid the crown, so the section in which the leaves come out of, from getting wet, because orchids are very easily susceptible to crown rot. So if you have orchids at home and you tend to mist them, my advice is avoid misting, because over time that mist can collect on the crown and it can get deep into the plant and it can rot from the inside out. And that's how you can lose an orchid. And you wonder, why is it dying? What's going on? What am I doing? I'm misting it. It likes to be mist. Not necessarily. Instead, get yourself a humidifier and keep the space humid. I have a humidifier. I recently got this new one. It's a larger one. This is now a 7, so it's a slight increase. But this one's also more obscure, kind of hides in between. You don't see it unless you see the mist. But this one's also a smart one. I'll link it below if you're interested. Again, it's by one of my favorite brands, Govee. It's a smart one. It's linked to my phone and it's paired to my hydrometer. So I tell it what to do, when to turn on, when to turn off, and that's it. I set it and forget it, and I plug it in when I need to. Anyways, back to the orchid. So my orchid, here I'll show you. This is my OG girl. I call her my bestie, my beastie. She's huge. She's got 2 flower spikes that she's pushing out for me. So she's got one here, and she's got another one here. And then this third one here is the last one that she bloomed in. This previous spring, she pushed one out, and she had blooms for about 7 months. And I just cut her at just between the last dormant node and the last node that had a flower. So right now she's growing beastly. She's got tons of roots, you can tell. So with orchids, clear pots is highly recommended so you can look at the roots, because orchids have a tendency to easily get root rot if you overwater them or if you keep them moist too long. So what happens with orchid roots is the external piece of the roots itself, it acts like a sponge. It kind of expands and retracts when it uses up water. And there's this tiny little vein in the middle that kind of helps pool the water and around that. So these roots here look a little damaged. That's because I used to spray fertilizer on them and I learned that that over time damaged the roots. It's not destroyed. It's still absorbing moisture. It's now just cosmetically damaged. But she's grown so many roots now to the point where she's very happy. And yes, orchid roots are very, very aggressive. But she's happy enough to give me 2 flower spikes because she's produced enough roots and leaves that she feels comfortable in putting out 2 flower spikes. And that's very, very a good sign that your orchid's very healthy. Orchids love bright light, so direct sunlight I would avoid because it can damage the leaves. bright light. So you see where my Beastie is? She's in this bright grow shelf. She's been exposed to a ton of bright light. It's not direct sunlight, so it's not as harsh. That's what's really helped her in that flower spike production. The more light a plant gets, the more higher a chance it has to produce flower blooms. So remember that important key factor. And if you're interested in this shelf, I really love that shelf. I'll link it below also. It's been such a great shelf for propagations. Now, the one thing with orchids is typically what I've noticed is they won't have more than 4 or 5 leaves on each side. So 10 max. That's from my experience. And from you can see from here on this side, she's got 1, she's got 2, 3, 4, and then this 5th one. And on this side, she has 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this 5th one that is starting to yellow. And that's fine. Older leaves over time. That's what happens with orchids. Older leaves get lost. Just wait for the leaf to get fully yellow, crunchy, and then it'll come off like an onion. Don't try and pull it off. Let the plant pull away nutrients and everything from the plant. It'll redirect, and then you'll be good to go. Now, if you remember, I was talking about that crown rot. So you see how in pots, orchids have a tendency to grow like this. You put it in the pot, and the crown kind of faces up because we like to see the flower, right? You buy orchids for their flowers, not because the gorgeous leaves. So the crown itself, this is where new leaves come out of. This is the section that's most susceptible to rot. So if you missed it and you get water that just collects and eventually it pools down because water sticks to water, it'll collect in there if your space doesn't dry out properly. And then over time, it gets in and it falls into the crown and it rots the plant from the inside out. So if you water your orchid and you get water in here, don't freak out. It's fine. Just take like a paper towel and just kind of stick it in, dab it in, and then let it absorb the moisture, and you'll be fine. Now, watering with these. So again, clear pots so you can see the roots. Very chunky mix. Orchids roots like to breathe. Again, naturally they grow on trees and they grab onto the bark. So the water that they get is usually from the mist in the air or the rain, but the water's always running through. It's not standing in the orchid over time. So what I do to know when to water my orchid is I always use the bottom of my pot as my guide. So I'll show you guys now. Do you see how there's still condensation in that bottom space here? That is telling me she doesn't need to be watered yet. I wait till that gets bone dry before I water her. See, there's still water on my finger. Let me show you right there. That is telling me she's still good to go. And the roots themselves will be very telling. So these roots, you can see they're starting to turn a silvery gray, but they're still green. That means they still have a good amount of water in them, and that's good. Don't think that the roots are gonna like die if you forget to water them. I typically go 7 to 10 days, I've noticed, with on average with this orchid because my space is pretty much on a pretty consistent temperature and humidity range. So my room goes between 68 and about 74 during the winter. And then during the summer, it'll stay about 78 because obviously it's hotter. So she needs more water during the summer and obviously during the winter less. But this is my guide, and she's been happy. She's been very happy. Obviously, when I have to repot her, I'm going to have to break the pot because these roots have just pushed through. But the reason why you want the slotted pots is you want the air to move through, right? You want airflow to go through to help evenly dry out the soil, your medium actually. I wouldn't call this soil. It's actually a mix of orchid. There's a little bit of moss in there. I think there's some charcoal too. This was like a prepackaged orchid mix. You can do half and half orchid bark and moss and just mix it up together. That way there's a nice even distribution of moss that holds moisture, but also bark that gives chunkiness to your orchid. Now, so the actual act of watering, I just run her in the sink. I run a runner with lukewarm water for a while, and then you'll feel that the pot get heavier because obviously the moss will retain some moisture. And you'll see the roots start to turn kind of a greenish color. That means that they're slightly absorbing the water. So what you'll notice is the lower roots are thicker because they do the bulk of the water absorption. So when I water her and I run her for about a minute with the lukewarm water, once I turn off the water, anything that's trickling through, I just set it in here and it catches and it'll partially fill. And then I just leave that in my plant shelf for about 2 hours and let the roots pull up as much as it likes. Then I just dump it out. One thing I did not mention is what's encouraging my orchid to bloom two spikes, I would say, is she's getting a good amount of fertilizer. And I'll link this below. This is the proper orchid. It's got the right nutrient mix that orchids prefer. That's why I use this one for orchids. All my other plants have a very generic fertilizer, but I always give my orchids a specific one because I notice it's helping. So what I do is when you get that water in there, I just do about 2 or 3 sprays in the water, and then the fertilizers gets in there and the roots pull it up and they get the nutrients they need. That's pretty much it. So I'll show you my other one. She's got a much longer flower spike. You can probably see her behind me here. Yeah. Something I didn't mention is it's currently December. So if you think that orchids cannot bloom throughout the year or cannot produce flower spikes throughout the year, this is a good testament that they can bloom throughout the year. Granted, they're given the conditions that makes them think that the temperature is stable all year round. Because if they know it gets cooler, they will start producing less leaves because they'll start to go dormant. And I have to clean her. She's got a little bit of sap there. That's fine. The story behind this one, and she's got the 2 spikes. She's got this one and this one, which you can see she's starting to push flower buds out. This one, she did not bloom for 2 years. She was one of the ones that I thought it was just an orchid I was going to have and it was never going to do anything. She's smaller, so she needs watering maybe about a day or two ahead of the larger one. You can see her bottom kind of looking a little dry. She's got a little condensation still, so she'll probably get water tomorrow, and then the larger one will get water 2 days from now. But you see the roots are now more silvery gray than the others. She definitely will need more water. The way to distinguish between um, roots and flower spikes is the flower spikes come out in between where the leaves grow, not on the edge of the stems. So do you see here we have these two? You see this flower spike here. It's coming out between where a leaf is, this one down here. I'll run my finger so you can see. And then the leaf above it. Same thing with this one. This one's easier to see. See, it's coming out between the 2 leaves. The roots come out usually on the outside. That's a good way to tell. And they have like these little nubs that tell you that they are definitely, there you go, flower spikes. So always give them support because once orchids bloom, the blooms get heavy and they can actually topple your plant over. So give them a good support. I usually do like these acrylic sticks with a little cute clip. But yeah, that's pretty much what's been happening with these orchids. 2 flower spikes. I'm excited. I will share some shorts later so you guys can see the update. So again, I pretty much have found what works for me. When you repot these, don't worry if you see it drop a leaf or two on the bottom. Allow them to fully adjust before you decide to repot them. This one has been in this pot about a year. So I had transplanted her from a 4-inch slotted pot to a clear one. So if you like these pots and you're interested in these for orchids, I will link these below as well. These are very thick plastic, but they're also translucent so you can see. So I like them for the durability. However, knowing that I have to break them to get them out of the pot is kind of a catch-22, but for the sake of the health of your plant and for it to keep growing, you'll be great. That's all I got. If you guys have any other questions about orchids, drop them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the content. I always appreciate you guys sticking around. Again, algorithm likes if you guys like and comment to show others that this is good content. So I always appreciate you guys.